and welcome to this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hennig. This week on the podcast, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty details of the Aaron Donald and Khalil Mack holdouts, why is it such a big problem of them getting these contracts done, and what the solution is for all NFL players who are not getting the money they want. Plus, my analysis of the new Aquaman and Shazam trailers, why the Astros trading for Roberto Osuna is absolutely disgraceful, the news about Season 2 of Krypton on Sci-Fi, how the Oakland A's may change the concept of season tickets forever in all sports, along with some big picture perspective thoughts on James Gunn being removed from the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise over old offensive tweets. So let's open that six-pack and get started on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Topic number one on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. So both Aaron Donald and Khalil Mack are holding out. They want new contracts. And both of those situations are very different. So first of all, let's deal with Khalil Mack. Why is Khalil Mack holding out? Well, Khalil Mack is in the final year of his initial rookie contract. Now, this season is going to pay him about $13.8 million. So you think, all right, well, what is Mack complaining about? Well, apparently Mack's concern has to do with if he becomes a restricted free agent and they try to tag him, is going to hurt his ability to negotiate for a longer-term deal. And at the end of the day, Mack wants to be paid like one of the top defensive players in the league, which is understandable. He is one of the top pass rushers and defensive forces in the game today. So the Raiders could sign to a contract extension that wouldn't disrupt the cap for this year, but is certainly going to affect the cap for the next several years. And considering that they've already given Derek Carr a new contract, they're going to have to give Amari Cooper a new contract soon, and they're going to have to pay other players as well on both sides of the football. The Raiders are concerned when they move from California to Las Vegas that they're going to be stuck in a contract that's going to hurt them before the expiration of the current collective bargaining agreement. So the Raiders have money concerns, as they're not a very, in NFL terms, rich franchise. Mark Davis is actually one of the least wealthy of all the NFL owners. And so they have to be even more frugal with their money than most NFL teams have to be. And Mack's concern is definitely founded. He wants to make sure that he's being paid as one of the best in the league. It's his fifth year in the league. He wants to be paid accordingly. Now, they could always set up this contract where he gets paid guaranteed money on a short term, and then the last few years they can void it or give him a new contract. But at the end of the day, Mack is more so seems to be concerned about the fact that he wants an extension beyond this year. The issue with Aaron Donald is very much different than Khalil Mack. And Aaron Donald's situation is probably, in terms of the NFL, probably the most embarrassing of all situations. Aaron Donald last year had a base salary of $1.8 million and had accounted for a total cap hit of $3.2 million. This year, Donald is going to count against for $6.8 million. Aaron Donald is at least $10 million below what he should be paid. In fact, Brandon Cooks is going to make $10 million more this upcoming year than Aaron Donald. And you and I both know that Brandon Cooks, he's not even the best player on his team. He's not the second best player. He's not even the third or fourth or fifth best player on his team. But yet he's being paid more than arguably one of the 3 or 4 best defensive players in the entire league. This is a Rams problem. This is where the Rams messed up in not taking care of Donald. And Donald has every right to demand more money. The guy is being paid well below his value in the league. And I'm all for guys getting paid. But when you have someone like Julio Jones, who is already being paid money, it's unfair to hold teams hostage for that, which is why we saw the Falcons and Julio come to an agreement. But the problem with guys like Mack and Donald is that both of them are being paid below their market value. And both those franchises have not allowed either one of those players thus far to negotiate for a price that is equal to their value. And this is more than just a problem with the Rams and Raiders. This is an NFL problem. You see, NFL players have the lowest percentage of revenue of the four major sports. Ironic, right? The sport that makes the most money in gross and net revenue league-wide between the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, and the NHL is the NFL, the National Football League. NFL players only get 47% of league revenue. By comparison, Major League Baseball players make about 49% of league revenue. NBA players make about 50% of league revenue, and hockey players make about 50%. So you're talking about the most profitable sport of the four major sports gives their players the lowest number on the revenue scale. And this is the players and the league's fault that we're in this predicament. It is the NFL and the NFLPA's fault that we are in a position where these guys are constantly having to hold out, where they're constantly having to demand new contracts. The league that should have the highest number of revenue from their players is the NBA, because the NBA is all about the name on the back of the jersey instead of the name on the front of the jersey. But the reason why the NFL should have a higher percentage as well is because everyone knows who Tom Brady is. People know who Aaron Rodgers is. People know who's on every NFL team, because everyone who follows football either plays fantasy football, they play daily fantasy, or they're gambling on the game itself. There are very few people in today's world who do not have some sort of financial bite into the NFL if they're watching and paying attention to it. There's plenty of people who watch the NBA and Major League Baseball and the NHL who never play fantasy sports. But fantasy sports is such a massive part, and sports betting is such a massive part of the NFL viewership, that the players have become an integral part of the league's marketability, its sales, and its promotion. That's why there's been such a huge backlash with the so-called anthem protests. And I call it so-called controversy because at the end of the day, neither side of the argument actually knows what the other side is trying to say or will give credibility to either side of the argument. So it's a fruitless argument that was being had. The NFL has put itself in this position to allow the players to be stuck in these contract disputes. I don't agree with what Le'Veon Bell is doing, but he has every right to look for a bigger contract. These players have a very short window to make life-changing money for themselves, for their families, for their futures. And if they're able to maximize that 3 to 6 year window, then more power to you. I hope you can maximize it. But the problem isn't the Rams. The problem isn't the Raiders. The problem isn't the Steelers. The problem is you have a collective bargaining agreement that basically pushes the players so far down the revenue scale that the NFL is practically taking its own athletes for granted, because it's a league that prioritizes the name on the front of the jersey over the player themselves. That's why these rule changes are so out of hand, because the league, the NFL, does not understand its own game. It's out of touch with its own players, and they don't understand the needs of their own game. The NFL has always been a reactionary league under Roger Goodell. They have not been a proactive league like the NBA is under Adam Silver. There's a reason why many believe that Roger Goodell is the worst commissioner in all of sports, because he's so out of touch with what the world sees of his sport, of his brand, of his league, that the league is literally living off a reputation at this point instead of proactively continuing to build the game of football. Football is the biggest sport in America, not because the NFL puts on the best product. it is the biggest sport in America is because it is the greatest demand sport. Less is more. The NFL gives you 16 regular season games, 4 preseason games per team, and then 4 weeks of a postseason, and that's it. The NBA gives you an 82-game regular season, plus 2 months of a postseason. Baseball gives you 162 games of a regular season, and then a whole month of postseason. The NFL is fewer games consumed than the other sports. Even though we talk NFL all year long, the NFL games that counts, that are relevant, that are significant, only encompass about 5 months of the year. Meanwhile, NBA, their regular season starts in October, and their NBA finals are in June of the next year. So what you're telling me is that while the NBA and the NHL have about 3 months of no significant important games, the NFL has 7 months out of the year without any relevant significant games. The NFL has become such a high demand sport that people are waiting the majority of the year for the NFL to come. The NBA, there's actually too much of the NBA. There's too much of the NHL. There's too much of Major League Baseball. So for a sport that is in such high demand and high traffic when it comes to viewership, when it comes to sports betting, when it comes to daily fantasy sports, it is overlooked about who is driving all of those things. It's the players. You may watch your team, whether said superstars on the team or not, but your attention span to the league as a whole is going to go down if your favorite players or the players on your fantasy league or the players that you're placing your prop bets on are not involved. So for a league that's only 5 months out of the year, the NFL players have done themselves a disservice because they prioritized less practice time, less contact in practice, and not prioritized them making sure they get paid. There's going to have to be concessions and compromise in the next collective bargaining agreement. And part of that concession and part of that compromise is going to have to focus on making sure that the best players in the game who are not quarterbacks are paid a reasonable wage in terms of what the rest of the players around the league are getting paid. Because if Fletcher Cox, who plays the same position as Aaron Donald, is making more than double, almost triple what he is this year, that is not an equitable wage for Aaron Donald from the Rams. And the Rams, their problem is they only have so much money to go around because of salary cap restrictions. So if the salary cap was larger and the players got more revenue each year, there would be less players holding out like Aaron Donald and Khalil Mack, demanding that they get paid an equitable wage. That's how you fix the problem surrounding guys like Mack and Donald. Now, that's a long-term solution. Short-term, I think the easiest solution for the Aaron Donald holdout is if they literally just went to him and said, look, Fletcher Cox is getting paid this. We will give you this. And for Khalil Mack, they tell him, look, Von Miller, a similar player with a similar skill set and similar ability, is getting paid this. We will give you this as well. At least then the players are saying, look, at least you're valuing me on the same level as players who will play my position, who have a similar impact on the game and on their teams as I do. I think that is how you fix those situations short term. But big picture, if we're going to get rid of the holdouts, we're going to get rid of all of these money issues, you got to get back into the CBA and renegotiate the revenue the players are being given from a multi-billion-dollar league like the NFL. Topic number 2 on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. So in the last week, the Aquaman and Shazam trailers have both come out. And realistically, this is where DC is trying to right the course and what they should have done all along. The problem with the entire DC movie universe plan from day one is that they didn't have a real plan. And that's what I think frustrated people the most, is that it felt like they were literally just throwing darts at a dartboard to see what stuck. When they gave Christopher Nolan the opportunity over 12 years ago to make the Batman trilogy, which became Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, and The Dark Knight Rises, 3 movies that are among the 20 highest grossing superhero movies of all time. DC never foresaw the success that those movies could have. And when they had all of that success, DC's solution wasn't to say, oh, people want quality movies. They want depth to their superheroes. They want more than just explosions and crazy special effects. Instead of taking away that message, their solution was to say, hey, Christopher Nolan, can you help us make a Superman movie? I mean, they literally couldn't even learn the lesson that was put right in front of them. And then on the flip side, what has Marvel been doing? They built an entire cinematic universe from the ground up without their heavy hitters. No Spider-Man until a couple of years ago. No X-Men. No Fantastic Four. That's the equivalent of the DC cinematic universe doing what they're doing without Superman, without Wonder Woman, and without the Flash. All you have is Batman and everybody else. That's what Marvel had to work with. And Marvel didn't even debut with their Batman. They didn't debut with one of their heavy hitters. Marvel took a C-level character, a guy who historically was not the most popular, or not even one of the top 10 or 15 or 20 most popular characters of Marvel Comics. But thanks to very good writing, acting, directing, presentation, storytelling, the Marvel Cinematic Universe was built on the shoulders of what was not one of Marvel's most popular characters. Did DC learn that lesson? No. What DC said was, how big can we make this? Because we are too big to fail. In their extensive laziness, what did they do? They went out and they got Christopher Nolan, David Goyer, and all those guys to help produce and write the Man of Steel movie. Now, for all intents and purposes, the Man of Steel movie was a very well done movie, excellent acting, a very good story. Yeah, the fight sequence between Superman and General Zod at the end was too long, but overall, the movie deserves an A- grade. And when DC had the success they did with Man of Steel, their next step wasn't to say, all right, let's bring in some more character development movies. Let's bring in a Flash movie. Let's bring in a Green Lantern movie. Let's bring in a Wonder Woman movie. Let's bring in a Batman movie. Let's bring in a Cyborg movie. However you want to build your universe and then lead up to a Justice League movie. No, they didn't do that. They immediately went with the crossover movie, Batman v Superman. The movie felt thrown together. The movie felt rushed at times, suffered at the box office. Then comes out Wonder Woman. Excellent movie. Very well done. A to A+. Good acting, good directing, very good story, very good presentation. You go from that to Justice League. Another rushed movie, another movie with gaps and holes, suffered at the box office, suffered on multiple levels and did not meet expectations. Because of those failures, now DC is getting back to what every movie universe has to do. What has made Marvel successful? What has made any movie franchise successful? It has been the development of characters. It has been good writing, good storytelling, good presentation, and building from the ground up. You cannot build a house without a foundation. And what DC tried to do is they tried the shortcuts to building something great instead of building it from the ground up. And now, with the Aquaman movie coming out in December of this year and Shazam coming out in early 2019, we finally have movies that will expand the DC universe, that will give more substance, more foundation to the DC universe, and introduces two characters that allow you to do more expansive ideas with your universe. The introduction of Aquaman is going to open up the whole world of Atlantis, the underwater world, its connection to the history of mankind in the DC universe, and allows you to have more of an understanding of who Aquaman is, why he is able to do what he does, his relevance and significance of him being a part of the Justice League. Because if you watched the Justice League and didn't watch anything else, all you would say is it's a collection of superheroes. And I'm not really sure what makes them super, or their history, or how they got here. The only guy that really gets an explanation in Justice League is Cyborg. And they didn't even do that full justice, because you kind of had to figure it out along the way. This movie allows you to have a background on Aquaman, on Arthur Curry, on the whole underwater world, and it looks like it's going to be the kind of movie that we really need for a character like Aquaman, which was opening the audience to a whole new area of comic book history that has never been presented before. Kind of like what Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 did for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You get this whole massive expansion into things that were never presented to you before. And I think that is going to be a great step forward for the DC Cinematic Universe. Then you have Shazam. Shazam is a very unique character, and we're not going to get hardcore right now into the history of Shazam, but Shazam is one of the oldest characters in comic books. And there was actually a point in comic book history where Shazam, who used to be known as Captain Marvel in the 1950s, was actually a more popular comic than Superman was. Shazam is a character that allows you to bring in a more child's view of superheroes, some levity, some more fun, less dark, less nefarious, less adult. Because at the end of the day, comic books were not made for 40 and 50-year-olds. They were made for people between the ages of 10 and 30. So how do you get back to those roots? You introduce a character like Shazam. Shazam, for those who don't know, is a superhero that every time he says the word Shazam, he turns into a superhero with various attributes. He has the speed of Achilles and the strength of Hercules, and all these different powers of these mystical people of ancient times. And he's given it by this wizard. And the whole point is that he is supposed to be a champion for good, a defender of the innocent and the weak. And that Billy Batson understands what it's like to be weak and not have things. So he is more understanding of how to protect the innocent, how to protect those who need to be protected than maybe someone else would be. And this again opens up a whole new universe into magic, into the history of the DC comic book universe, and into different types of characters and their standing in the universe. And also, what does Aquaman do? It takes you into the underworld, into Atlantis, underwater. What does Shazam do? It takes you away from Gotham. It takes you away from Metropolis. It exposes you to different areas of the DC universe as a whole. These are two of the kinds of movies that should have come before Justice League. But now, as we've mentioned in previous podcasts, that DC has fired multiple executives at the top of the food chain at Warner Brothers and DC Entertainment. That Jeff Johns has stepped down, going back to wanting only a writer's role. That they've changed the people who are the ones overseeing this entire movie cinematic universe. Maybe with Aquaman, Shazam, and then Wonder Woman 2, those are the kind of movies that can take DC out of the doghouse in terms of movie watchers and comic book fans and bring them back into the fold. Now, I can't promise that for Birds of Prey because, honestly, I have so low expectations on that movie despite how cool it sounds. But I believe that Aquaman and Shazam can help start making up for the mistakes that were made in previous movies and expanding the DC movie universe, giving a new foundation, and allowing the entire universe to grow. So when there is another Justice League movie, when there are other crossover movies down the line, when you see Aquaman or Shazam appear in other movies down the line, you're not just, well, who's this guy? Where did he come from? No, you're working off of a previous knowledge like the Avengers did. So when Thor, Iron Man, Captain America all ended up in the same room, you weren't scratching your head saying, so why do I care that this guy is here? Topic number 3 on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. The Major League Baseball trade deadline has come and gone. And while a lot of trades have gone down, the one I do want to focus on is the trade that sent relief pitcher Roberto Osuna to the Houston Astros. And the reason why I want to focus on this trade is because of the circumstances of why this trade even happened. Roberto Osuna was traded to the Houston Astros for a minor league pitcher in Hector Perez, a failed closer in Ken Giles, and another basically throw-in for the deal in David Paulino. And the reason why this is significant is because the Astros were buying low, hoping for a big reward in return. Osuna, who was an all-star in 2017, was on his way to another successful season this year. Before his current suspension, he had a .293 ERA and 9 saves in 15 games. But Osuna, back in May, was arrested and charged in a domestic violence case. That is part of the reason why the Astros were able to get him at such a, shall I call it, low cost in return to the Blue Jays. Basically, the Astros took Osuna off of the Blue Jays' hands. Osuna was supposed to have a court hearing on Wednesday, August 1st. His court case has now been put off until September 5th. So now, Osuna, who has been suspended for 75 games for what baseball calls violating their domestic violence policy, he is eligible to begin pitching Sunday, August 5th. And he's going to a team with numerous players who have been outspoken against perpetrators of domestic violence. Now, Osuna has not been convicted of domestic violence. He has only been arrested and charged. But the pictures involved in his case were very gruesome. The attorney for Osuna has come out and said that his client is planning to plead not guilty, and that Osuna is only remorseful of the circumstances of the situation, not actually committing said crime, which he's going to plead not guilty to. And the reason why this is a disgraceful situation is because A team like the Astros that won their first World Series in franchise history last year, with a high level of character locker room, with guys like Verlander and Altuve and Springer and Morton and Brian McCann. All these guys have high character, good moral fiber to their being. You're taking basically a volatile explosive, throwing it in there and saying good luck. Jeff Luhnow of the Astros, their general manager, has done something despicable. He is potentially going to hurt the chemistry of a team that was well on its way to possibly making another World Series appearance. And for what? To acquire a closer? You're telling me he couldn't have acquired anybody else. You're telling me there was no one else for him to acquire and that Osuna was the only option he had? I mean, that just sounds ridiculous. And furthermore, an organization that claims to have a zero-tolerance policy against domestic violence, an organization that has players who have spoken out against domestic violence, called for harsher penalties than what Osuna is serving right now in his 75-game suspension for, by the way, not even have been convicted of said crime yet. His court case has been put off until September 5th now. And they got a guy who's going to be active starting Sunday, August 5th, who everything about his situation flies in the face of the Astros players and their organization and what they've been preaching to people for years now. The thing that bothers me the most is that this organization willfully is looking the other way and acting like this is not that big a deal. I don't care how talented Osuna is. I don't care that he had 2 consecutive seasons with 35 or more saves. I don't care that Osuna has one of the highest strikeouts per 9 innings of any relief pitcher in the last 3 years. All of those things mean absolutely, positively nothing in the grand scheme of things. The problem is that domestic violence is an issue in today's world that has been mishandled and misrepresented on multiple fronts. And for an organization that claims a zero-tolerance policy that has built an entire locker room, that entire team that won a World Series on a certain type of quality of character and person, to bring this volatile 23-year-old situation and life all playing out in the media into their locker room could spell disaster. Astros general manager Jeff Luhnow, you should be ashamed of yourself that you couldn't find anybody else to trade for. But you trade for someone who's coming off a 75-game suspension. You gave up 3 players for him. And you're trying to excuse it away by saying frivolous things like, I'm confident that Osuna is remorseful and has willingly complied with all the consequences related to his past behavior, unquote. When the reality is he's going to plead not guilty anyway. I know players who have been suspended for domestic violence have been traded before. We all know about Aroldis Chapman being traded from the Yankees to the Cubs, but he wasn't traded during his suspension. When Jarius Familia had his incident off the field that was later cleared and dealt with, or when Jose Reyes had his off-the-field incident, yes, these were all situations that warranted punishment on the field and off the field. But in neither of those situations did the general managers who acquired those players after the fact make excuses for their past behavior. They went and saw if the player was going to be the same player when he came back from his suspension, and then they were okay with acquiring said player. If this Astros team struggles in the postseason, or if there are volatile locker room situations for the next couple of months, it will be directly put in the lap of the Astros general manager, Jeff Luhnow, who is so naive and is so tone deaf to trade for a guy who is accused of doing an horrific, disturbing, by the pictures attack like a Roberto Osuna has done. And if he in any way is found guilty in any of this, or if he causes problems in that locker room, it is the GM's fault, and the GM should be absolutely, positively ashamed of himself to mess with a locker room and an organization, a team that was supposedly built on high character, high moral fiber players to win a championship. And then you go out and get a guy who is potentially a scumbag. Topic number 4 on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. So on the heels of some of the rumors of a potential Michael Bay movie in the DC universe, there was an official announcement at San Diego Comic-Con recently that Lobo, the crazed bounty hunter from the DC Comics universe, will be coming to the television show Krypton for season 2. And not just that, but that Lobo will be working alongside Seg-El, Superman's grandfather, to help fix what was done, which was Zod stopping Brainiac and kicking Seg-El out of the main continuity, causing a future where Superman comes to Earth and is not a symbol of hope, but a symbol of Zod on his chest. And the significance of Lobo being on the show is twofold. One, Lobo allows you to expand into a part of DC lore that has really not been touched on at all in the television or movie sides of the universe. The other issue with Lobo is that Lobo is a uniquely powered character. He is basically as strong as Superman, but he has Wolverine's healing factor, is the best way I could explain it. Lobo is very intelligent, he's very capable, he's very determined, and he's ruthless. But he's also got this comical side to him, and he actually does care about life in the universe. He just cares more about accomplishing his bounty than he does anything else. The way they're describing it, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that Seg-El meets Lobo in the Phantom Zone. Because remember, at the end of Krypton Season 1, Seg-El, along with Brainiac, were pulled into the Phantom Zone, which exists outside of time and space. So I think there's a strong possibility that Lobo is the one that helps Seg-El get out of the Phantom Zone. They also confirmed at Comic-Con that Brainiac would be making a return as well. So, begs the question, does Brainiac, Lobo, and Seg-El work together to get out of the Phantom Zone, and they make some sort of truce between the three of them that's going to allow Seg-El to overthrow General Zod? Because remember, General Zod's out of time and place too. He is, roughly, he's about maybe 100 years out of place and time, if you go by the timeline that they use on the television show. So maybe in an attempt to put things back to normal, Seg-El works with Lobo and Brainiac and kind of uses Lobo as a guy to keep Brainiac in check. Kind of like the muscle with a little bit of brain, while they all work together to get out of there. It's a fun element to add on to the show. I'm really looking forward to this, because when they first announced the Krypton television show, I had my reservations, because I thought, okay, so we're doing a television show that basically is 100 years before Superman was ever born on Krypton. This should be maybe interesting. But then the more I read about it, the more I saw trailers, the more I realized that I wanted to give the show a chance. And it ended up being one of the better shows of 2018 altogether. Realistically, by the end of 2018's regular TV watching season, I would argue that Krypton is one of the best comic book based shows on television altogether. Very good story writing, very intricately woven character relationships, very interesting plot twists. I thought it was just very well done. And I think that if you're going to introduce a character like Lobo, you're taking the show up another notch. Especially if you make Lobo in a way that is true to the comics, which is very intelligent, very ruthless, very capable, very powerful. And if Lobo is basically how he is in the comics, he may be the guy to work with Segel to neutralize Brainiac in the Phantom Zone while they escape. The other thing about the show Krypton is I think Krypton is allowing viewers to experience comic books the way it was meant to be experienced in a television show. You go back and watch a show like Smallville. Smallville was very, very, very drawn out prequel to the Superman that we all know from the comics and from movies and from television shows and from animated series. And you look at the way the television shows are successful or done today, like The Flash and The Arrow. And on Netflix, you have shows like Daredevil and Luke Cage and Jessica Jones. It's when you take the viewer beyond the surface, when you get them into the character's background and what they're going through and their needs and their struggles and all these different elements that comics don't always cover, or if they do cover, they can't always dig as deep into the universe behind everything that's going on with the superheroes. Krypton does an excellent job at bringing you into the world of Krypton, bringing you into that environment, immersing you in something that has never been seen before. And that's really the beauty of what comic books were always meant to do, is meant to take you away from your world and take you somewhere else. That's what great fiction is meant to be, in my opinion, which is great fiction is a escape from the world around us. And it's such an escape that it doesn't interfere with how we view the world around us. It either can only reaffirm our beliefs, or it makes us have a better conversation about the things we think and believe about life and morality and other issues that we deal with on a daily basis. But it does it in a way that is less confrontational and more insightful, fun, and enjoyable. And Krypton deals with those kind of issues like any good fictional storytelling should. I'm definitely looking forward to season 2. And if you haven't seen season 1, I highly recommend sitting down and watching. It's very different than anything you've ever experienced in terms of a science fiction or in terms of a comic book based TV show. Topic number 5 on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. So the Oakland A's and Major League Baseball team are changing their ticket plans starting in 2019. They are actually getting rid of the traditional season ticket packages that most sports teams have done for as long as I can remember. And they're going with a program they're calling A's Access. The idea of the plan is that instead of just paying for a certain number of games, that's all you can go to. The point is that if you buy A's Access, you can get the reserve seats you want for your 10 or 24 games, but then you still have the ability to go to all of the A's home games. So if you bought 10 games of reserve seats, you can still go to the other 71 games because you get general admission seating. And then because you are a member of A's Access, depending on how many games you've gone to already, how many games you plan to go to, you can upgrade your seats with membership points. Also, there are more benefits to this program as well. Aside from being able to go to every A's home game, along with the reserve seats that you want each and every year, you get 50% off all concessions, which is equal to $3 for hot dogs, $4 for domestic draft beers. Also, 25% off all merchandise in the team shops. And the A's are allowing you to do a monthly payment plan for A's Access instead of paying for it all up front, let's say on your credit card. I think this is the future of ticket plans in sports. Any team that implements this is going to immediately see the benefit for two reasons. One, in sports like baseball, basketball, and hockey, It's a long season. Baseball, you got 81 home games. Hockey and basketball, you have 41 home games. And these games spread out over months and months. You're talking about a baseball season that spans the course of 6 months for the regular season. NBA, same deal, spread over 6 months. NHL, it's actually 7 months when you really break it down. So this doesn't even include the playoffs. You have a half the year to take advantage of this program. And you're getting discount on concessions. You're getting discount on merchandise. Also, there's a parking benefit to it as well, whereas people on this program have shared parking spaces. People who get A's Access members, they also don't have to fight for parking. Also, the pricing for it is not going up. In fact, if you're someone who buys 10 game or 24 game plans every year, and you're an A's fan or you're an A's ticket buyer each and every year, you're paying the same price, but you're getting more games out of it. You're getting more opportunities out of it. And it's one of those deals where everyone's going to win, because when there are cheaper concessions, people buy more concessions. We've seen this already in Atlanta when they lowered their concession prices at their new stadium. We saw a marked increase in concession sales across the board, making it more accessible to the fans. You're inviting more people to actually come out to your ballpark. And this is obviously the big deal for the Oakland A's, because their franchise has had a lot of trouble selling tickets for years because their stadium isn't that attractive. The team really hasn't been that good until this year for the most of the last 6 to 8 years. And this is an opportunity for you to take care of the real fans of sports. And that's the working class fan. That's the fan that's going to come to your game, that's going to watch your game, whether your team is trendy or not. You see, one of the problems with sports like the NBA and certain Major League Baseball teams is that they've outpriced major portions of their fan base. So if you're someone who's a working class family or is or lower middle class, and you're only making 30, 40, 50, 55,000 a year, some of this stuff may be totally out of your price range to go to a game at Yankee Stadium, to go to an NBA game at Oracle Arena for the Warriors. A lot of these games are not within the price range for a lot of you to spend your money. And what happens is that you take out an entire demographic of the fan base. You disconnect a part of your fan base because you're being greedy. And as a result, what happens? Home field advantage and home court advantage is not as powerful anymore, because the people who are going to the games are not the hardcore fans. It's the casual fan who's going because it's the trendy, cool thing in town, not because they're really legitimate fans who love and care about the team. The A's are giving back to the real fans. When you allow general admission for all 81 games, I bet you they're going to see an increase in attendance next year. And when that increased attendance comes along, what's going to be the next step? Other teams are going to start following suit. Just look at the Baltimore Ravens this year. They saw what the Falcons did last year with their concessions. They're lowering their concession prices as well. We've seen other teams do similar promotions around sports. When bobbleheads became a big deal in baseball, other teams started pulling up bobblehead days. Anytime one team does something and is successful, every other team wants to start jumping on the bandwagon. And this is a way of drawing back people to be interested in sports, especially the sports that take up half the year. The NFL is a supply and demand league. There's only 8 home games. It's only on for less than half the year. The rest of the year, we're talking about football, not actually watching football. Whereas with baseball, basketball, and hockey, we are actually watching the game for 6 months regular season and then another 2 months for the postseason. So you're talking about 8 months out of the year where we are watching baseball, basketball, and hockey. The NFL, we're really only watching it for about 4 to 5 months. So as a result, there's a supply and demand element to the amount of tickets, the amount of people watching in the stadium each week. It's a lot easier to fill up a football stadium because there's fewer games to go around, whereas baseball, basketball, and hockey, there is more of a burden on the franchise to keep the fans coming, whether the team is winning or not. And this is a way for the A's to do that. And I think as soon as this is successful, this is going to spread to other sports and other teams as well. And it's going to bring back in the working class and lower middle class families who want to take their kids, who want to go out to games, but they can't afford it right now because they feel like they've been outpriced. And when you start bringing those fans back, you're filling up the stadium, they're telling their friends, they're bringing their friends. It's a domino effect that is going to cause more and more teams to sell out games than they have over the last several years as they've raised prices. This allows you to not have to raise prices, but instead create a benefit for people to invest in these ticket packages. Because it's hard for teams to gauge revenue when it comes to selling single game tickets. But when they're selling tickets for multiple games, when they're selling tickets for 10 games, 24 games, 30 games, or whatever the package deal is, that's guaranteed revenue that they put into their budget. And the more guaranteed revenue you have, the more the team doesn't feel like they have to upcharge you in other areas. It's just a simple business practice. I think it's going to benefit the A's as well as other baseball teams. I think you could do this with some NBA and NHL teams as well. I don't think this is a universal thing, but I think in markets like NBA market, like a Phoenix, a hockey market like in Sunrise, Florida with the Panthers, those are the kind of markets that this could be very successful in because you're basically incentivizing people to come out to your games instead of de-incentivizing them by upcharging them and putting it out of their price range altogether. Topic number 6 on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. We're going to touch on a topic that is a little controversial. It has to do with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I'm not going to hold any punches on this. The news came out about Marvel removing director and franchise producer James Gunn from the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise. And even though there's been a lot of feedback from people who have acted under James Gunn and also have known James Gunn about how Marvel should give him another chance and keep with him on the franchise, Marvel has put themselves into a very precarious position because the reasoning behind getting rid of James Gunn, while understandable and logical, the fact that they are neglecting the requests and demands of their stars in these movies while compromising on the demands of other stars of other movies is going in the long run be a very bad look for the organization, and here's why. Disney, who owns Marvel, purposely wanted James Gunn hired because Disney likes to present themselves as very family-friendly, family-oriented, and not very edgy, not dangerous, not doing anything that could be considered amoral or considered non-family friendly. And the series of tweets that were screen grabbed of James Gunn from his official Twitter account that date back to 2009, 2011, and 2012 are, if nothing else, suggestive and offensive. Without getting into detail of the tweets, you can look them up if you really want to see them for yourself. James Gunn claims that they were done in jest and they were jokes that fell on deaf ears. But when you read through them, it comes across as a guy who just doesn't have a clue, who just doesn't understand that you just don't say certain things out loud, whether they're funny or not. And coming off as basically a guy who wants to joke in terms that are pedophile in nature. If you're somebody who thinks it's funny to make analogies and jokes about things that involve pedophilia and involve inappropriate child behavior, inappropriate behavior with children, there's something wrong with you. It doesn't matter if you're joking or not. And that's the problem for James Gunn right now. He had a series of about 10 to 15 tweets from 2009 to 2012 that were just disturbing, offensive, very bizarre, and honestly, they're uncomfortable to read. But every person who has been an actor under James Gunn in the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise has been requesting openly and publicly that he continues to direct. On the flip side, the director was announced a couple weeks before the James Gunn incident of who will direct the upcoming Black Widow movie starring Scarlett Johansson. Now, Scarlett Johansson had made it pretty clear that she wanted a female director. So, Marvel interviewed about 70 female directors before making their final decision. They chose Kate Shortland. Now, Kate Shortland is not a well-known director. She's mostly known for directing indie films, and she has a relationship and knows Scarlett Johansson. She came highly recommended by Scarlett, even though there were 70 directors interviewed for the role, and many female directors who have had many accomplishments in the film industry. They chose the woman that Scarlett Johansson wanted. They are basically giving Scarlett Johansson what she wants. And this is a little bit of a dangerous situation, because when you give an actor what they want, it's very similar in sports to when you give a head coach too much power over a franchise, right? You let the head coach try to do the drafting and the scouting and the trades and the salary cap. It's not always going to work out. Or that you go to a player and say, well, who do you want to play with? Who do you want to coach you? Who do you want to be the GM? Sometimes you got to let people do their job. And the fact that they gave in to Scarlett Johansson so much when basically the entire star cast of Guardians of the Galaxy is demanding that James Gunn stay. Even people who don't even know James Gunn are behind him and supporting him, saying, look, we understand people made mistakes in their past. People did bad things. We think you should be able to keep doing your job without having to suffer the punishment of someone finding tweets from about 10 years ago. I think that there's a middle ground to all this. First of all, what James Gunn did and what he put on Twitter is really just, if nothing else, showcases he is a poor judge of what should be said and shouldn't said in public in general. And even worse, he's having these thoughts on his own time, and a lot of times thoughts become actions. It's just the way the psychological process works. You know, you think of something before you do it, just a natural progression of things. And I'm not suggesting that James Gunn is interested in any of these things happen or interested in any of these scenarios. What I'm saying is that you don't put something out there if it at least didn't come to your mind as something that is a function. It's like the old saying about sarcasm. There is a half-truth in all sarcasm, because sarcasm comes from a depth part of the mind based on something that you don't like about something or someone else, and that you express it as a joke, as a shield for your disdain for someone or something else. It's something in psychology that's been discussed and talked about for 150 years. It's the same thing when it comes to putting out things on Twitter. It's coming from your official Twitter account. It's coming from your mouth. It's putting you in a bad position. So James Gunn put himself in this position the moment he pressed send. It's like Herm Edwards, who is now coaching Arizona State, former coach of the New York Jets and the Kansas City Chiefs, always used to say, don't press send. James Gunn didn't just press send, he pressed send multiple times. So I got no issue with him losing his job, because Disney is trying to maintain a certain level of reputation, and Marvel is trying to differentiate themselves, shall I say. The problem is that on the same company, Marvel, which is under the umbrella of the Disney Corporation, said to an actress, who do you want to direct you? Who do you want to write your script? Oh, you want these people? Well, we're going to interview 70 people to make it look like we're not going to give you who you want, but then we're just going to give you who you want anyway when it comes to directing and writing a movie based on a character that realistically, there probably isn't a movie about this character, Black Widow, unless it's Scarlett Johansson. This is totally unlike Captain Marvel or Wonder Woman getting their own movies. There is not the depth of history and interest with the Black Widow character as there is in a Wonder Woman or a Captain Marvel. There is not a history with Natasha Romanoff that has to do with the complexities and the power set and the relevance to the Marvel Universe as there is with Carol Danvers. Carol Danvers has a multitude of extensions throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe of her relevance and her importance and her value. Natasha Romanoff does not have that same level. So for her to get a movie, her own solo movie, is purely because Scarlett Johansson is the actress. And the way Marvel has totally and completely concede and submit to everything Scarlett Johansson wants is a bad sign. Because on one hand, you're kicking a guy out despite what everybody wants in your own studio, but on the other hand, you're totally giving in and yielding to an actress who, for all intents and purposes, her job isn't a director, her job isn't a writer, her job is to act, her job is to put on the product that is being given to her to put forth. So this is a mess that Marvel has put itself into. And if I'm Marvel, I might have to consider giving James Gunn the reins back to Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Not because, you're backtracking or anything like that, but because of the fact that you can't totally concede and submit to all of what Scarlett Johansson wants, but then not give Chris Pratt and Zoe Zandela and Dave Bautista and all these other actors who were involved in Guardians of the Galaxy not what they want. Doesn't matter what somebody tweeted in 2009 and 2012. It has come down to the fact that you already set a precedent that says that you're basically going to give in to your stars of a movie franchise with almost anything that they want. So if the stars of Guardians of the Galaxy want James Gunn, you kind of have to give them what they want. You already set the precedent. So this is the decision Marvel has to make. Is Marvel going to turn around and say, look, the situation with the Black Widow movie is a isolated situation that we were trying to compromise and yield to what Scarlett Johansson wanted in order to get this movie done? Or is Marvel going to turn around and say, look, we already set this train in motion. We can't turn back on the James Gunn thing now. But moving forward, we are going to take more input from our actors and our actresses in the directing and the writing of our movies. But this situation we can't get around. Marvel's got to make one decision or the other. They can't hang out in that gray area in between both worlds and try to claim they have a moral high ground. And on the other hand, totally and completely submit to the requests and the desires of an actress who realistically gained half of her popularity because she's playing said character, and you're only making said movie because her profile is so high that it elevates the character to have the opportunity to have a solo movie. So Marvel's got some tough decisions to make. James Gunn, he's got a whole mess of situations he has to deal with. Maybe going to some psychologist, maybe going to get some therapy, get some help. But on the other hand, Disney and Marvel got to have an honest conversation about how are they going to explain to people that they completely conceded to the desires and demands of one star, but not give in into the desires and demands of other star actors and actresses. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. If you like the podcast we bring you, why don't you subscribe to this YouTube channel? You catch each episode each and every week. If you have any thoughts or comments on the topic you brought up today, you can drop it down in the comment section below. And hit that like button if you enjoyed this podcast. I'm Josh Hennig, your host of the Mutant Blitz Podcast, and I'll catch you each and every week for topics of sports and the comic book, movie, TV industry with my own unique perspective on all of the top news stories right here on the Mutant Blitz Podcast.